Hi, welcome back to yet another revision video. So today I'm going to do a quick one on the concept of God in process theology. So process theology is a little bit niche, but it's very, very interesting. And it's going to help you not only with the God topic in Year 1 Christianity, but also the problem of evil in Year 1 philosophy, because there's a big overlap there. Shout out to Amelia for this one because she requested some revision videos on the God topic. So here we go. So there's a few people involved in the development of process theology. You might have heard Alfred North Whitehead talked about. You might have read a little bit about him. But your main man is David Griffin. So process theology is a relatively new thing. So we're talking 20th century. And the reason it's quite modern is because it's very heavily influenced by fairly recent developments in physics. I say fairly recent, we're talking kind of the last 100, 150 years. But one thing that did influence Griffin's thinking was ideas from quantum mechanics, particularly this idea that at the subatomic level, so at the tiniest level of reality, the universe is in a constant process of change. Now, that's about all I know about quantum mechanics. You don't need to worry about being asked about quantum mechanics in the exam. You definitely won't be. But if you can just explain that idea to a tiny extent to show where these ideas come from, that's a good thing. So anyway, Griffin's point is that if the universe is in this constant process of change, which physics suggests it might be, this led him to think that creation being a one-off event, like a moment in time where God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, that doesn't make sense to him. He sees creation as being much more of an ongoing process. So let's look at some basics. Process theology claims that the universe has always existed, not necessarily in the same way it does now, because as quantum mechanics tells us, it's changing all the time. But it's eternal and uncreated. So according to process theology, there hasn't been a time when there was nothing. There's always been stuff in this state of flux and change. Alongside that is God. God has always existed. No one created God. God is eternal and uncreated. Therefore, the universe wasn't created by God. Straight away, we've got quite a big departure there from traditional Christian teaching. Griffin, in process theology, sees the relationship between God and the universe is panentheistic. This means God is in the universe and the universe is in God. They're two sides of the same coin. They need each other. A good way to think of it is a bit like the universe is like a body and God is like the mind that's in that body. They work together, they exist together, but we might understand them separately, the same way that we might think of our mind as being separate from our body. But there's obviously a close relationship there. So what did God do if he didn't create the universe? Because a big criticism of process theology, as you're going to see, is what's the point of the God that process theology describes? Well, he still does quite a lot. Griffin sees God as being a persuader. So he's not a creator as such, but he shapes the way that the universe works. He works with what he's got. So Griffin sees God as persuading the universe into a state of order rather than chaos. The default setting of the universe is chaos, according to Griffin. And so God's job is to bring order to that chaos. This has been going on for 13.8 billion years and uses the processes of the Big Bang and evolution. So the Big Bang may have been an event that took place in the universe, but it wasn't necessarily the start of the universe. And there are theories in physics that back that up as well. God has a certain amount of influence over the universe, but because the universe wasn't created by God, the universe can push back. It has the ability to resist his attempts to change it. So God can try to bring order to the chaos. There are things that God can do, but he can't do everything. And again, we can think of this with a human analogy. you've got the ability to influence how healthy you are because there are things you can do. You can eat well, you can exercise, you can look after yourself, but you can't change everything. You can't change how tall you are, you can't control how long you're going to live, you can't suddenly change the colour of your eyes or your skin or anything like that. So just like with us, there are things we can control and things we can't. It's like that with God as well. God can influence the universe, but the universe can push back, if that makes sense. So this is the bit that most people remember about process theology, and it is the central point. According to process theology, God isn't omnipotent. It's important to say here that doesn't mean he's useless. That doesn't mean he can't do anything. God can do a lot, but God can't do everything. God can persuade the universe towards order, and God does do this. I mean, we live in what's really a very ordered universe. But because the processes of the universe are so random and chaotic, he can't fully bring them under his control. And there's a big reason why Griffin thinks this, which actually comes from the Bible. So he's got quite an interesting take on Genesis 1. Now, Genesis 1, which I'm sure you'll have looked at by now, starts with the earth was without form and void. Griffin thinks that's a mistake. He thinks that's a mistranslation of the original Hebrew. He sees it more as the earth being without form and void. Now you might be thinking, well, I can't hear the difference. I don't know what the difference is there. It's a subtle difference, but it's quite important. If we say the earth was without form and void, that suggests that there's nothingness, which is obviously the traditional Christian view. If we go with Griffin's take, which is the earth is being without form and void, that suggests that there is something already there to work with. It's formless, it's chaotic, but it's something, not nothing. So if Griffin's right, this supports the view that God didn't actually create the universe from nothing. Instead, the God and the universe have always existed together, with the universe being in a chaotic state. And what God does is brings order to the chaos. Now, if Griffin's right, then the traditional Christian understanding of Genesis 1, which gives us this teaching of creatio ex nihilo, creation from nothing, is wrong. Because God didn't create from nothing. God created from pre-existing chaos. And Griffin's quite upfront about the fact that we can't know this for sure. He doesn't know this for sure. He doesn't claim that this is definitely the nature of God, or that process theology is absolutely factually correct, because this is theology. It's unprovable, and he knows that. He's just trying to say that given what we now know about the universe, which is a hell of a lot more than would have been known at the time Genesis 1 was written, it's simply more probable, it's more likely that God is not omnipotent and that God and the universe are in this panentheistic kind of codependent relationship. And the argument that the universe is in this constant state of change makes sense in the context of quantum mechanics. It makes sense in the context of quite a lot of what physics is now telling us. So there's quite a bit of scientific support for some of what Griffin is saying. So there's some strengths to process theology. It fits with quantum mechanics. It fits with the Big Bang Theory and the theory of evolution. It's supported by one possible translation of Genesis 1. And it's not just Griffin who thinks that the biblical translation of Genesis 1 might not be quite right, or at least might be open to interpretation. It's not a closed book. It's not saying we're right and that's the end of it. It's claiming probability rather than certainty. And for a lot of people, the idea of God bringing order to chaos is more logically plausible than God creating everything out of nothing. Creation from nothing feels a little bit like a logical contradiction. And you've probably had discussions in class about whether God can do logical contradictions. Is it a limit on God's power if he can't create a square circle? Well, a square circle isn't a thing, but we could also argue that creating something from nothing also isn't really a thing if we're talking logically. So there are strengths to this, but the biggest strength, and this is where we start to talk about the problem of evil, process theology does a pretty good job of solving the problem of evil, the logical problem of evil and the evidential problem of evil. If we don't require God to be omnipotent, the problem kind of goes away, because he still loves us. He may want to control evil. He may be horrified at the amount of evil. He may suffer along with us, but he can't fix it because he's not omnipotent. He can't make the universe behave the way he wants it to. He can only persuade it. But that biggest strength is also the biggest weakness. We don't need a long list of weaknesses for process theology, because for most people, this is enough to kill it. Certainly most Christians. Because if you talk about a God that's not omnipotent, for many people, that's not the Christian God. And so that's kind of the end of the argument. The claim that God is not omnipotent is just too far away from what most believers imagine a divine being to be. They would just say, well, this isn't the God that I worship. This isn't the God that I believe in. If God didn't create us, why would we thank him for giving us life? If God can't stop bad things happening, what's the point of praying? These are valid questions. And for the vast majority of Christians, the God that is described in process theology is not a God that would be worth worshipping, because he's too limited, he's too weak. And saying that he can't stop evil, but he still loves us, many Christians don't find that terribly reassuring. So a big strength is that it does solve the problem of evil, but at a big cost, which is that it moves away from a God that most theists recognise. Okay, that's it for now. Enjoy the rest of the videos, like and subscribe, share them around, and I'll catch you next time.